842nd contact, Thursday the 20th of April, 2023, 6:36, HRS.
You are here early, but both welcome and greetings.
Thank you, you are also greeted.
Greetings to you too, and thank you for welcoming us.
I am really very happy to welcome you. By the way, even after your first visit, I looked up what your names meant.
My name means the one who judges according to the law.
I have already read that from the name book, and you, Jjfa, the meaning of your name is the life principle fulfiller. Note, the name Jurata appears in the Book of Names in a different spelling but with the same meaning, namely as Jurata, with the first A underlined, which means that the emphasis of the name is on this A. The name Jjfa is not listed in the name book, but a similar name, namely Ifana with the meaning the life principle fulfilled.
That is correct. Where did you get what you are saying, the name book?
I wrote that myself, for which I just got the names from Jjfa early on. But it is good that you are coming here already, because yesterday I finished the work I had to do. In the process, a few more things came up that the panel has to examine and decide whether it was formulated correctly by me, as well as whether it is correct at all. That is why I also called out, so you can take it all down and pass it on to the panel.
We can do that immediately, but afterwards we want to talk to you about various things.
Of course, but I'm interested in when you learned German. Because I wanted to ask that on your last 2 visits, as well as if our conversation is being recorded at all, and if I can retrieve it and write it down.
Everything we talk to each other is recorded. Of course, you are allowed to record our conversation, as it is also done from our side. And as far as the German language is concerned, well, we learned it because we were assigned by the board to keep in touch with you during the staff's absence from the station.
Aha, but that everyone had to leave straight away. I guess that has a special meaning, although I don't need to know what that is, which is why I don't want to ask about it.
Then let us do our work first, after which we can talk. We have been well informed concerning all the happenings that are going on here on Earth. Consequently, we are largely oriented as to what is also happening here on this world at the present time.
That is good, because I would like to bring up some things that I am interested in.
You can, but first we want to do our work.
That took that duration, but now everything is done.
Everything takes time. If only the earthly overpopulation could finally be significantly reduced. Politicians should finally intervene and enact a controlled birth stop. But apparently those in power are as stupid as the demonstrators who only demonstrate and cause damage because of CO2 and environmental pollution, etc., but do not realize that there are far too many human beings on Earth, and that this number must be reduced to far below 1 billion by a radical birth stop lasting several years. The Earth is not only overpopulated, it is 19 times overpopulated, being designed for a human population of little more than 500 million human beings. Although Jjfa said that one day in the new millennium, people would get a little wiser and try to take measures against overpopulation, also in governments, nothing has happened in this regard yet. I remember that he said that it would even be decided by the government that a birth control pill would be distributed free of charge by the state in order to prevent pregnancies. But so far I have also not heard or read anything that a country has decided something in this framework. Maybe it will come, but when?
That is so regarding time, although we have a different term for it, but...
Of course, but it comes to the same thing. But what do you think about what Jjfa said?
If Jjfa said that, then it will also be so. But actually the question is when that will be.
Yes, that will be so. What is to be said, however, is that wars were on Earth thousands of years ago. There were peoples fighting each other.
But what is happening at present with the Ukrainian war? That is a version that you certainly do not know, as it is also happening on Earth for the first time. This is that many countries are interfering unilaterally and supplying weapons to Ukraine in order to strengthen the warmonger Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in his war mania. This, while America is working in the background, because of which the war has also broken out, and Russia has started it. All the madmen who thoughtlessly supply weapons to this mad Zelensky are thereby furthering the purpose of the whole thing, namely that America with its NATO comes one step closer to its delusion of world domination. Namely, by defeating Russia and making a pig of it, and incorporating Ukraine into NATO.
We know this, and all the ignorant and irresponsible of those states that supply weapons, whereby many human lives are murdered and destruction is unparalleled, and the war continues longer and longer, are unable to realize, due to their very pitiful inability to think, that this America is the real authorship of the whole thing. As we have followed the events on Earth since ancient times, and as our records prove, America was founded in its very beginnings by murder, when a certain George Washington shot a peacenik without hearing him when he came with a white flag to negotiate peace. That is on our records, as are all the war crimes since then that America, with its military later emerging and murdering secret services, mercenaries and race-hate organizations, etc., has carried out and still continues to carry out on the vastness of the whole earth within this framework of its delusion of world domination.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but I do want to say that there is still a distinction to be made, because not all Americans are so minded as those who are striving for world domination. That only applies to a part of the American people, because another part is good, and that part consists of human beings of righteousness, and does not at all agree with what is being striven for hegemonistically and secretly, and without the knowledge of the people by the bulk of the rulers, the religionists and, in fact, the sectarians, the madmen of the army and the secret services, etc. Especially the religionists and their sectarians are to be mentioned, on whose cap also goes the emergence of the corona rampantly spreading disease that is taking hold worldwide as a pandemic, which has so far claimed more than 8 million lives on Earth alone.
This is known to us, because it has been known to us since the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic, through our planetary information system. So we have been informed about it, that the fanatical religionist the American was influenced to seek China's leadership in order to create a rampantly spreading disease, which on the one hand should serve as revenge, and on the other hand to exterminate that part of the American people who are considered non-Christians, people of other faiths, such as believers in Islam. For example, believers who belong to Islam or Judaism, or non-believers and thus those who were considered infidels. However, with regard to the religious beliefs and religions of America, I have no knowledge.
Neither do I, but perhaps you can explain some things to us about that.
I can, but also only superficially. The bulk of America is probably a diverse community of believers in Christ, mostly of the Protestant variety, although as far as I know so-called evangelicals or something like that play a big role. But evangelical is not in the foreground, because that is not the same as evangelical. It's a bit complicated because the word doesn't actually describe a separate denomination in terms of different churches, such as evangelicalism or Catholicism, because the whole of the denomination is a type based on Protestantism. The religious belief theater and the intensity of belief within Protestantism in this respect drive very wild and strange blossoms of belief styles. Because if, for example, evangelicalism is taken into consideration, then this, among others, can very well find an allocation to Christian spiritualism. If you take the evangelicals, then there is something personal to God among them, because they effectively regard God as their Father, whereby they equate Jesus Christ with Him as Savior and Lord, which is actually the basis of their delusion. But when I speak of America and its religions, that is to say beliefs, then I have to speak of the American state, that is to say the American nation, as a great myth, as Jjfa explained to me as follows. America was actually founded by the English, by religious refugees who had in mind to create a place where religious tolerance should prevail. This was America, and everything was set up in such a way that the rule of separation of church and state came about. Religion also became practically omnipresent in American society, but such a variety of religious beliefs is so diverse that one can effectively speak of a multi-sect state, the like of which cannot be found anywhere else on earth. Therefore, religion is so deep and present in American society that the concept of secularization, that is to say the temporal of the worldly thinking, and also the transition of concepts and all processes and ideas, from a religious point of view, have been loosened and dissolved, and continue to be so, especially with regard to questions concerning the conduct of life, as with regard to logic, the mind and reason. Everything is a little different than here in Europe, such as that in America, namely by a pastor. The national motto, "In God We Trust," was stamped on the 2-cent U.S. coins in 1864, when Congress enacted the Coinage Act. Since 1956, the sectarian slogan has also been emblazoned on the dollar notes, which in and of itself sufficiently demonstrates the religious mania of the majority of Americans, and also testifies to what is fundamentally responsible for what America is doing, namely a worldwide sectarian-induced murder and destruction by the military, the secret services and other cliques of murderers, conditioned in the faith of Christ, with the bullshit slogan on the notes for this purpose. But the fact that this is counteracted, because torture, murder, and racial hatred in all imaginable evil forms have been practiced by the U.S. military and secret services, etc. since time immemorial, is not taken into consideration at all, and is excused in the name of state security. The commandment listed in the Luther Bible, Genesis 2, chapter 20, verse 13, "Thou shalt not kill," is not considered or followed by America in any process. Obviously, this only applies to the entire Christian world outside the USA, but obviously not to America itself, because it obviously has a special divine regulation to be allowed to murder and destroy worldwide through wars, secret services, and capital punishment, etc., as well as to interfere murderously and destructively in the affairs of foreign states. In America, all conceivable branches of Christianity are present, whereby the believers are predominantly Christians, and above all Protestants, because most of the immigration streams came from countries that adored Protestant Christianity, such as Switzerland, Germany, England, France, and the northern states of Europe, such as Holland. But there were also Catholics from Ireland, as well as Latinos, but above all Italians, who spread out in America and built up the murderous society and criminal organization mafia there. All this happened in the 18th and 19th centuries and has continued to this day. The mafia is still present today in large numbers and continues to work in a murderous and criminal way, and it has also spread to many other countries around the world, so also to Europe. The very special thing about the Christian religious sectarian movements in America is undoubtedly their immense multiplicity, which can hardly be surveyed. Consequently, among the Protestants alone there are many groupings of evangelicals, who form quite a number of very different groupings, as is also the case, for example, with the most diverse varieties of Baptists, Lutherans, Methodists, and Mormons. Among the multitude of religious sects, there is also a movement which, especially and mainly in America, indulges in a religious delusion of faith of an American alleged prophet named Joseph Smith, who is considered the chief of the sect he founded in the 19th century. These religious delusional communities, which could not be more different, including the rich mainstream churches of the actual Protestants, as well as the equally financially strong churches of the Catholics, are in truth nothing more than places of delusion, which are moreover led by cultists, as they also exist and operate in Europe, which also have the same negative connotations as in America.
And that there is a large Jewish population in America, mainly in New York, we know that.
That's right. And that was also the thorn in the side of the religious fanatic who wanted to exterminate people of other faiths with the help of precisely, which is why he teamed up with this vengeful man who negotiated the deal with Mao that ultimately led to the corona pandemic, and
I don't understand. Why didn't the man remove his thorn in the side? After all, it was causing him.
Excuse me, you wouldn't know. We have words and sayings that describe something such as a thorn in the side, which means that the man was driven by hatred, or that the expression simply means that one human being is a nuisance to another. It is also meant to be a howl, a red rag, a runaway, unbearable, rotten, as well as such that a human being is upset or indignant, obstructive, embarrassing, intolerable, intrusive, unacceptable, indignant, tormenting, unwilling or devious, or that he is considered unsympathetic, sullen, obnoxious, stuffy, uncollegial, irksome, insufferable, or mean, etc., etc. This is actually taken from the Christian religious book Bible, which claims in Genesis 4, chapter 33, verse 55, that the dear imaginary God said something like, "If you do not drive out the inhabitants from before your face, then if you let them remain, they will become thorns in your eyes, just as they will become thorns in your sides, and urge you to get out of the land in which you dwell." While this is not literally what is written in the Bible describing what refers to the exodus from Egypt to go to Canaan, I have simply reproduced it in spirit. There are other ways of speaking than that of the thorn in the eye, depending on what is hidden behind the mental behavior of the human being, and so we human beings of the earth need certain expressions, such as a thorn in the eye, which would be very painful and can therefore mean hatred. Another form of expression, for example, like a louse has crawled up my liver, means roughly that something has simply gone wrong with the human being, etc. But if I am to say anything further about America and its religious delusion, I must mention the following concerning the corona rampantly spreading disease, that part of the American people which is thoroughly unrighteous, and which must never be associated with the righteous, naturally does not want to admit that everything of the corona rampantly spreading disease is America machi, which is based on religious fanaticism and on boundless hatred. Therefore, every means and effort is being frantically sought to define the coronavirus as natural in origin. But now back to the religious and secular delusion regarding hegemony, and thus the delusion of world conquest, which primarily results from the religious delusion of faith, which fundamentally plays the main role in everything that happens in America's actions, activities, and governance, as well as in daily life. Especially in politics, the military, the secret services, which of course includes the whole sectarian system, it has to be said that all this is unique on Earth. In fact, there is nothing like it elsewhere in any other country on Earth. For example, apart from the mainstream Protestant and Catholic churches, there are countless other sects, some of which I will mention, to name just a few of the countless different God-deluding sects. There are, for example, the Catholic Apostolic, the Seventh-day Adventists, as well as the Adventist subcongregations, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Theocratic Organization, in the shadow of the Watchtower Free Bible Students congregations, Church of the Kingdom of God, Les Amis de l'Homme, Scientology, Youth, Christian Fellowship, Worldwide Church of God, Branham Movement, Keller Fellowship, Philadelphia Movement, Temple Society, Original Christian Fellowship, Emma Berger Fellowship, Christian Science, Unity School of Christianity, and Mazdaznan Movement. The bulk of all the sects form the bulk of America's delusionists, who slavishly rule everything and financially exploit and suck the delusionists to the bone, as well as commit countless murders, not only through wars America wages worldwide under the motto, "In God We Trust," murdering as well as destroying land after land for its old-fashioned hegemony delusion. If America's sectarianism is examined closely, then in addition to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which are effectively the most prevalent religious sects, there are countless other sects, ranging from Buddhism to Enthusianism, that exist like nowhere else on Earth. In New York alone, in the Jewish district of Brooklyn, there is the second largest Jewish population in Israel after the metropolis of Tel Aviv, as I discovered with Ptah, and we found that this Jewish population is not popular with Christians, nor are the Muslims, who are present throughout the country. An immense number emigrated or fled to America after the last World War, but on the other hand, Many are also in America as a result of illegal immigration and slavery, such as Muslims, who make up about 14%, as Ptah said. Due to the immigration, which took place from all over the earth, practically all religions are represented up to the craziest small sect of all kinds. So also up to Satanism, Shintoism, nature religions, witchcraft, necromancers, Native American religions, Zarathustra freaks, esoterics, devil worshippers, magicians, Gnostics, Lucian freaks, death metalists, occultists, Freemasons, the fan community, and so on. American society is thus far contaminated in all manner of sectarian processes. Consequently, it is never as perfect as the bulk of that part of the unrighteous Americans and the gullible and stupid of the world imagine it to be. Even if it is said that America, with its large number of believers of all kinds, is a pretty good example of religious tolerance, this is nothing but deception, lies, and deceit. Consequently, my advice is to think for oneself and to see, perceive, understand, and accept reality and its truth as effective reality. Of course, every human being must always be open-minded and respect the respective faith of every human being as such, in such a way that he does not object to him for the sake of his faith, harm him physically in any way, or harm him with regard to material forms. This is also true if he's completely blindly addicted to sectarianism, as is particularly true of sectarian and therefore God-delusional Americans. This must be said specifically because many of the earthlings tend, because they do not have the true values of ethics and morality as a whole sufficiently intuited, to rise up ethically, morally badly against fellow human beings.
You know America's condition quite well.
It is truly remarkable and amazing, to which I must confess that I find you, Andy.
Don't do that, please. I already know what you want to say, which is not necessary. Actually, I wanted to say something that on the one hand concerns America, but is also common in many other countries. Namely this, that at an inauguration the president sectarianly takes an oath on the Bible, as well as that at sectarian holidays sectarianism is held in the highest forms, such as Christmas and Easter, that it is really almost unbearable to listen to the radio or watch television, because everywhere it is overflowing with religious-believing sectarianism. Although more and more heated debates are being held by devout Christians regarding Holy Christmas, Holy Easter, Holy Ascension, as well as Merry Christmas, etc., more and more of these expressions are being rejected, even by sectarians. In particular, it is the affluent, although I think that they are adapting to the changing times and language and therefore use, for example, Happy Holidays instead of Holy Holidays, which means that they are not directly classified as sectarians, which really does somehow cause offense in some places and is unwelcome to hear. Why this is so may very well be due to the fact that much of the delusion of faith is hanging out of the throats of the earthlings, that is to say, is too much, because many of them have distanced themselves so far from religions that they no longer want to know anything about churches, etc. Perhaps many of them still cling to religious delusion, but not so much that they take all the humbug of faith seriously, and therefore leave the houses of delusion, the churches, behind. In Germany, according to the news, last year, 2022, about 300,000 Protestants, but also 265,000 Catholics, will have said goodbye to their churches. In this respect, the questions of religions are now also being dealt with publicly, whereby it even happens that hitherto believing Christians take the risk of being frowned upon, namely by insulting their own hitherto practiced religion or another. The fact that this has become ubiquitous is proven by telephone calls explaining to me that the shit no longer works with these persons, because the delusional belief in a God and Savior or Jesus Christ is nothing but lying and money-grubbing, and they don't want to know anything about it anymore. Moreover, and I find this particularly worth mentioning, it is often said that the persons are now better off in every respect since they no longer indulge in the nonsense of faith, think for themselves, and begin to realize reality.
I can understand that.
That must be something special for these Earth humans, to suddenly be free from the influences of faith, to think for themselves, to decide and act independently without the influences of faith, and without fear that there is a God above them who will punish them for it.
You are probably right, because the very fact that people have told me on various occasions that they have become free from faith addiction makes them happy and glad, because now they are really free, and the delusion of God has held them like a slave. The fact that I tell the truth about delusion is viciously reproached and denounced by delusionists as cursing God. But the fact that the callers profess to now be carefree in many things, to be able to think, decide, and act freely for themselves without having to fear a God above them and his punishment, has made them a completely new human being with a healthy self-esteem. And when I think of these words, which I have heard several times, I just curse at the delusion of God. But I think that if I am going to curse, then I know what I am talking about and what I am cursing.
I also expected that from you.
I know that. Partly I also said some things about it in the last years, which was also mentioned in the contact reports.
We all know that because we follow everything important that you say. And this has been happening for the whole duration of the teachings by Jjfa. That was a decision taken by the body at the time and has been followed without fail ever since. Apart from that, however, we also deal with many areas of earthly processes, but not with religions and their connections and so on, because in that respect we want to.
I understand that because your ancestors had very bad experiences with it, from which they could only free themselves a little more than 52,000 years ago.
When,
The bullet came. I know that because I know the history. But with regard to religions, that is to say the religious worldly delusion, I would like to say the following in connection with America. At first I was completely ignorant about everything. Only when I knew the closer connections, such as that the religious fanatic was behind everything that happened with the vengeful, did I understand everything. The fact that was not only the actual originator of the idea, and was on fire for the Vietnam War, and was able to influence the respective superiors, that this war was then really waged, clearly proves, as has been the case since time immemorial, that the American government leaders, which is probably also the case in practically all other countries on Earth, can be influenced by religious faith and control politics in some way in this regard. Besides, also interfered in politics everywhere, and at his religiously devious request, the vengeful was also harassed and became willing to do what was demanded. But the fact that the whole thing got out of hand, failed, and turned out completely differently from what was intended, that was just bad luck, as we say when something goes wrong. This happened in the same way as also the old Bush, who was president of the USA at the time, was persuaded by lies to start a war in Iraq, because Saddam Hussein was not a Christian, but a Muslim, which did not suit the religious fanatic at all. Bush Jr., in his lust for power, then completed what his father could not. Consequently, he too launched a war against Iraq, and then had Saddam Hussein hanged, and not only because he believed all the lies that were fed to him about the nuclear weapons that Saddam Hussein allegedly had, but which were never found because they did not exist. Well, when I was still in Iraq several times, where I also met Saddam, and at that time the country and everything in general was really nice and well maintained. Even if Saddam was an evil, conscienceless dictator and killer, everything was really clean and in order all around. With his help I was able to buy a camel with which I could also travel through the deserts with my Turkish friend Kurtulmuş. Today, however, due to America's war and guilt, there is chaos all around and something like anarchy, etc., and Iraq has not been able to recover from the war, which is also called the Gulf War, and took place in 2003. And the hammer of the whole thing is that practically many rulers of all countries of the earth are incompetent fools who let themselves be charmed by lies and deceit, by false know-it-alls and schemers, liars and profiteers, and make wrong decisions and act contrary to what would be correct. America, however, has not only destroyed Iraq by war and wreaked havoc, but has also murdered horribly in Vietnam and in various other countries. Much of what I saw as good and beautiful in Iraq was completely destroyed and fell out of order, which was good and right despite the bloody dictatorship. The complete destruction of Iraq was basically due to the American religious fanatic, who brought about America's attack on Iraq, whereby at that time the fanatic was able to incite the old U.S. President Bush with lies and hatred against Saddam Hussein by lying and claiming that Saddam had and was manufacturing nuclear weapons, etc. The American religious fanatic was the only one to blame for this. The religion fanatic American, precisely, who also incited, who then agreed with Mao in the 1970s that the corona rampantly spreading disease, as it has been called since 2019, was tinkered in laboratories, lived long enough into the new millennium to continue working undisturbed in U.S. politics, which was very easy for him because the majority of Americans believe in Christ. But let's go back to the coronavirus. While the first virus was created in the mid-1970s in China through laboratory work, which then spread through a laboratory accident, mutated and caused epidemics that claimed victims in many places, nothing was yet known about the later epidemic. However, further research was carried out, after which it happened at the beginning of 2019 that after a change, that is to say, a new one of the many mutations, another laboratory accident occurred and the virus was released to the outside, this time in Wuhan, whereby the coronavirus spread rapidly, which very quickly spread to human beings and also to animals, livestock, and other living beings, and finally triggered a worldwide pandemic. This has so far claimed, as I said, more than 8 million lives, and more will follow. That is absolutely certain, contrary to the claim that it is all over, because it will all flare up again here and there. Consequently, no guarantee of absolute certainty can be given. Even people who have already been affected by the rampantly spreading disease are not immune, so they can be affected by the disease again. And the fact that many of the vaccinations were not harmless, but caused many deaths, is officially denied with flimsy claims, with Switzerland even leading the way with alleged precise findings and investigations, etc., that only extremely few deaths were caused by vaccinations, if any at all. Pata, however, contradicts this, and says that this is deliberate lying, because the number of vaccination deaths is also quite high in Switzerland. Well, the actual authors of the whole corona rampantly spreading disease have all died. The American, who, out of revenge, won the dictator Mao as an accomplice in order to have the disease created in laboratories, as well as the religious fanatic who was able to win over in order to persuade Mao as an accomplice, whereby the corona rampantly spreading disease finally came into being. Many millions of human beings were murdered by the fanaticism of the religion-obsessed man alone, just as millions of human beings who were not included in the murderous plan died as a result of the corona rampantly spreading disease that was created willy-nilly. A fact which the part of the unrighteous Americans do not want to be believed as truth, and claim that the rampantly spreading disease must have developed in the animal world. However, that the rampantly spreading disease was brought out as a result of a laboratory accident, and has spread to human beings, animals, livestock, and other living creatures contagiously and worldwide, this part of the Americans does not want to admit. The longer, the more they claim that it is a rampantly spreading disease that resulted from nature. Now it is simply to be said once again that the unrighteous of the people in America are to blame for the fact that the Russians started the war in Ukraine, which has now lasted for over a year and has cost many human lives. It is worth mentioning that the righteous of the Americans can distance themselves from this, because they are not listened to anyway when the bulk of the unrighteous masses howl away. So it is also with regard to the fact that the culprits for much that is unjust and shameful are actually to be sought in America, even if the actual authors of it all have already all died. But so what? For this is the Anthropocene of the present, that is to say, the time of the Earthlings, the so-called human beings, of whom the majority are not much good as far as humanity is concerned, as they have no idea of the whole scope of ethics and morals, and moreover, have a damaged conscience, advocate and wage wars, murder and destroy, and act like idiots in the same way as the Nazis did in the last World War. They deliver weapons to a war fanatic in the Ukraine, with which they also support the world domination mania of the Americans. Consequently, the descendants and their descendants of the weapon suppliers can then be enslaved and also directed by the corrupt and religious fanatic Americans.
We could discuss a lot more regarding all these happenings and incidents, but unfortunately we have to end our conversation for today because we have other things to attend to. Besides, the whole of what we have photographed is to be handed over to the panel because it is to be processed quickly. The two of us, that is Jurata and I, will stay in the ward as substitutes and be available for you. It may be that we will visit you again privately, but in any case, when we bring you back the material that we now have to hand over to the panel for processing. So I wish you all the best, and tell you that my thoughts will be with all that you have said.
I want to echo the words of Jjfa on that. We will surely meet again and have another conversation with each other that will be as interesting as it was today.
I think that will be so. Goodbye to both of you.
That's how it will be.